I see Groucho Marx with a cigar. I see Winston Churchill with a cigar. I see Fidel Castro with a cigar. I see George Burns with a cigar. And I see H.L. Mencken with a cigar. What that means, I don't know. Mencken has his hair plastered down and parted in the middle like alfalfa, and he looks like a toad. I'm thinking about him because I was recently appointing an official national curmudgeon, and his name popped up, but I hadn't read enough of his work to judge whether he qualified or not. Since then I have, and he does. He was known as a skeptic, a critic, a debunker, an iconoclast, the American Voltaire, and the Sage of Baltimore. That last would have pleased him. He stuck quite closely to Baltimore, his native city, and the city remembers him today, along with fellow author Poe. The local football team chose to honor the latter when they took the name Ravens, probably a better choice than the Bourgeoisies. Mencken was well read, and he had a penetrating vocabulary, as evidenced by what was probably his greatest work, a study of the American language, as distinct from the English. But he did not boast of a formal education. Instead, he claimed to have gotten his share of wisdom from a police lieutenant, a bartender, a shyster lawyer, or a midwife. Street smarts, that is. Sharp wits can lurk in unpolished skulls, he wrote. Similarly, he celebrated what he thought was great and distinctive about this country, the whole gross, glittering, excessively dynamic, infinitely grotesque, incredibly stupendous drama of the American life, which he claimed that its pallid literature, with very few exceptions, had failed to capture, appreciate, or even consider. As a critic, Mencken was not out to puncture falsely puffed egos. He was determined to crush them flat. He was not a gadfly, he was a steamroller. Of formal education, for example, he said it was largely the confection of imbeciles, and so the unhappiness of the young continues. In the whole realm of human learning, he wrote, there is no faculty more fantastically incompetent than that of pedagogy. Assessing Woodrow Wilson's biography of Washington, he wrote, this incredible work is an almost inexhaustible mine of bad writing, faulty generalizing, childish pussyfooting, ludicrous posturing, and naive stupidity. Reflecting on the ringing conclusion to the Gettysburg Address, he wrote, it is difficult to imagine anything more untrue. The Union soldier actually fought against self-determination. It was the Confederates who fought for the right of their people to govern themselves. Of domestic concerns, namely male fidelity in marriage, he claimed that it was the result of a lack of courage, coupled with a lack of money, and when those two had done their worst, a tiny nip of guilty conscience. He had no patience with anyone of Anglo-Saxon heritage, all of whom he dismissed as being cowardly and completely incompetent, hardly the leaders of humanity they imagined themselves to be. His two most frequent targets were religion, especially Puritanism, and democracy. Both, he wrote, were immovably grounded upon envy, the inferior man's hatred of the man who is having a better time. In our democracy we are stuck with a mob which is degenerate and a plutocracy which he found stupid and swinish. In a democracy, conformity is the noblest of virtues, he wrote, and the free functioning of personality is a capital crime against society. The men the American people admire most extravagantly are the most daring liars. The men they detest most violently are those who try to tell them the truth. Democratic man is quite unable to think of himself as a free individual. He must belong to a group, or shake with fear and loneliness. And this group, of course, must have its leaders. The distinction that goes with mere office runs far ahead of the distinction that goes with actual achievement. So much for democracy. Most famously, Mencken covered the Scopes monkey trial, at which William Jennings Bryan suffered an especially withering blast. He was, in fact, a charlatan, a mountebank, a zany without sense or dignity, full of an almost pathological hatred of all learning, all human dignity, all beauty, all fine and noble things. He was born with a roaring voice, and it had a trick of inflaming half-wits. His whole career was devoted to raising those half-wits against their betters, that he himself might shine. One of the last things Mencken published was about a Baltimore Park Board ruling that prohibited people of different color from playing together on park land. It is astonishing to find so much of the spirit of the Georgia cracker surviving in the Maryland Free State and under official auspices, he wrote. I have heard that the Great Depression virtually ended his career. It was a harsh and bitter time when there was no need for anyone, not even the sage of Baltimore, to point out to people how rotten things really were.